Russian shelling targeted energy facilities in at least 7 regions across Ukraine early on Thursday, Ukrainian Energy Minister Herman Halushchenko said on Telegram. Halushchenko said Kyiv, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Odessa, Dnipro and Zhytomyr were hit in the strikes. At least 2 people were killed in Kyiv and about 40% of the capital was without electricity following the strikes, Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said earlier on Telegram. Suspiln, Ukraine's state broadcaster, has posted this summary to Telegram of the latest news to emerge from the overnight strikes. It reports, in Kyiv, the alarm lasted for about 7 hours. 2 people were hospitalized due to falling rocket fragments. 5 people were killed in the Zolkiv district of the Lviv region due to a rocket hitting a residential area, 1 person was killed and 2 were injured in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Energy infrastructure and industrial enterprises were also damaged in the region. About 15 strikes were made in Kharkiv and the region, 2 people were injured. Critical infrastructure was targeted. Metro and electric transport are not working. In Kirovohrad Oblast, Odessa Oblast and Zhytomyr Oblast, energy infrastructure facilities were hit. Also, according to preliminary information, there are hits in Vinnytsia. At night, electricity restrictions were applied preventively in all regions to reduce risks to the system. Emergency power outages were used in regions where infrastructure was damaged. Kharkiv region and Zhytomyr region are partially de-energized. Kharkiv is completely without electricity. The claims have not been independently verified. Ukraine's Air Force has issued a statement via Telegram on the wave of attacks from Russia overnight. In it, it claims that the defense forces of Ukraine destroyed 34 cruise missiles, as well as 4 Shahid 136/131 unmanned aerial vehicles. It claims that a total of 48 caliber-type cruise missiles had been fired by Russia. It described the attack as featuring 81 missiles of various types in total, and that the launches were carried out from 10 Tu-95 strategic aircraft, 7 Tu-22 M3 long-range aircraft, 8 Su-35 fighters, 6 MiG-31K aircraft and 3 caliber KR carriers in the Black Sea. As a result of organized countermeasures, 8 Kh-31P and Kh-59 guided air missiles did not reach their targets. It is worth noting that the armed forces of Ukraine do not have means capable of destroying Kh-22 and Kh-47 Kinzhal and S-300. The claims have not been independently verified. Zelensky says, "It's been a difficult night after Russia fires 81 missiles at targets in Ukraine." Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has posted to his official Telegram about the night's events, writing, "It's been a difficult night. A massive rocket attack across the country. Kyiv, Kirovohrad, Dnipro, Odessa, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Zhytomyr, Vinnytsia regions. Attacks on critical infrastructure and residential buildings. Unfortunately, there are injured and dead. My condolences to the families. All services are working. The energy system is being restored. Restrictions were imposed in all regions. The enemy fired 81 missiles in an attempt to intimidate Ukrainians again, returning to their miserable tactics. The occupiers can only terrorize civilians. That's all they can do. But it won't help them. They won't avoid responsibility for everything they have done. We thank the guardians of our skies and everyone who helps to overcome the consequences of the occupiers' sneaking attacks." The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has once again been completely disconnected from Ukraine's power grid due to Russian shelling, state energy company Energodom said on Telegram Thursday. Currently, the plant is disconnected and in blackout mode for the 6th time during the occupation. Units 5 and 6 are being put into cold shutdown, and 18 diesel generators have been switched on to power the plant's own needs, the Post read, adding the plant has enough fuel to operate for 10 days. The plant sits in the Russian-occupied part of the Zaporizhia region and is the largest in Europe. It has been held by Russian forces for some 12 months but is operated by its Ukrainian staff. The facility's latest disconnection from the power grid Thursday comes as officials across Ukraine reported Russian missile attacks targeting energy infrastructure. In addition, all domestic nuclear power plants located on the territory controlled by Ukraine have discharged their power due to the threat of missile attacks, the Energodom statement said. Ukraine has cut off power to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in the city of Energodar, chairman of the We Stand with Russia movement Vladimir Rogov told TASS on Thursday. Ukraine, cut off the supply through the last remaining power line to the Zaporizhzhia NPP at 4:53 a.m. The nuclear power plant is currently disconnected from external power sources, he said. It has nothing to do with shelling attacks, nothing happened in the area that could have led to the power cutoff. It is just an act of pure spite on the part of Kyiv, Rogov noted. He added that the nuclear power plant had been switched to diesel generators. Our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey is in Kyiv this morning, as Russia rained missiles down on the country, and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in the southeast of Ukraine crucially lost power. He described the situation at the nuclear power station as very, very dangerous, adding that generators at the site will only sustain it for 10 days. Ramsey said, "I think there is obviously going to be a lot of concern about the nuclear power station. It has not been hit per se, it's off the power grid. It has generators that can last for 10 days or so, but they will be trying to get power back to that." Russian forces have prepared deeply echeloned defenses in the Zaporizhzhia region, and the military is ready to repel a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive, Acting Governor Yevgeny Balitsky said on Thursday. "We are getting ready for this Ukrainian counteroffensive, TASS. We have quite a strong double line of defense. The military has reported that they are ready," he told Rossiya 24 television. Balitsky highlighted the role of the administration in defense, for which he said the military was primarily responsible. "We monitor supplies for the army, and help maintaining the supplies," the acting governor specified. According to Balitsky, there were about 40,000 Ukrainian troops near the locality of Prishib in the Kyiv-controlled part of the region. On Monday, Vladimir Rogov, chairman of the We Are Together with Russia public movement, said that the Ukrainian military had beefed up its battle group in the Zaporizhzhia area to over 30,000 to 32,000 troops to switch over to active operations. The Pentagon is looking into the possibility of installing US-made missiles on Soviet-era MiG fighter jets, used by Ukraine in its conflict with Russia, two Department of Defense officials and another person familiar with the matter have told Politico. The weapons are AIM-120 Advanced Medium-Range Air-to-Air Missiles, AMRAAM, designed to be fired by Western planes, including F-16s, and have a range of just over 100 kilometers, the outlet reported on Tuesday. However, the sources noted the challenges posed by the integration process, due to significant differences between US and Soviet technology. The key problem is that the missile and the plane are unable to talk to each other, they said, explaining that in order to fire a shot the aircraft's radar must find the target and then guide the projectile close to it. The issues that the Pentagon has been working on are, how do you mount this thing? Can you get all the electronics in the aircraft to talk to this thing that wasn't meant to be launched? One of the officials said. The sources pointed out that there were concerns over Kyiv running low on air defenses as the Russian forces continue with missile attacks on Ukrainian military and energy infrastructure, while also sending out decoy balloons with radar reflectors to deplete Ukrainian missile stocks. If the Pentagon succeeds in combining AMRAAMs and MiGs, it will mark the first time that the US would be giving Ukrainian aircraft the capability to fire air-to-air missiles, Politico wrote. The US and its allies have so far been reluctant to fulfill persistent demands by Ukraine for Western warplanes. Russia has warned that deliveries of more sophisticated longer-range weapons to Ukraine by the US and its allies could cross its red lines, which would lead to a major escalation. Ukraine is not planning to use Western longer-range weapons for attacks on Russian soil, if it gets any, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky told CNN. "We are not interested in Russian land," he said in an interview aired on Wednesday. "We cannot cross the Dnieper River at the moment, and we don't have the weaponry to reach them, the Russians, TASS. That's why I am emphasizing that we need the long-range weapons the US or any European partners manufactured only to protect our peaceful civilian population. And if we can push Russians even further with these long-range missiles or artillery, they will not threaten us any longer," Zelensky added. According to Zelensky, Ukraine is not ready to negotiate with Russian President Vladimir Putin under any circumstances. "We don't have any circumstances today to talk with the Russian president," he said. "We don't have any confidence in him," he added. "Russia will have to leave our Ukrainian TASS territory, and only then we could talk about diplomacy," the Ukrainian leader said. "We can find any format with our partners after that," he assured. Russia has repeatedly expressed its readiness to solve the Ukrainian crisis diplomatically. Ukraine's president and United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called on Wednesday, March 8, for the extension of a deal with Moscow that has allowed Kyiv to export grain via Black Sea ports during Russia's invasion. President Volodymyr Zelensky said after talks with Guterres in Kyiv that the Black Sea Grain Initiative was necessary for the world, and the UN chief underlined the importance of the deal to global food security and food prices. The 120-day deal, initially brokered by the United Nations and Turkey last July and extended in November, will be renewed on March 18 if no party objects. I want to underscore the critical importance of rolling over the Black Sea Grain Initiative on March 18 and working to create the conditions to enable the greatest possible use of export infrastructures through the Black Sea in line with the objectives of the initiative, Guterres told reporters. Zelensky said he and Guterres had agreed that rolling over the deal on March 18 was critically necessary for the world. Russia, which lifted a blockade of 3 Ukrainian Black Sea ports under the deal, has signaled that obstacles to its own agricultural exports need to be removed before it lets the deal continue. To help convince Russia to allow Ukraine to resume Black Sea grain exports, a 3-year deal was also struck last year in which the United Nations agreed to help facilitate Russian food and fertilizer exports. Ukraine and Russia are both major global suppliers of grains and fertilizers. Western powers have hit Russia with tough sanctions over its invasion of neighboring Ukraine more than 1 year ago. While Russia's food and fertilizer exports are not subject to sanctions, Moscow says restrictions on its payments, logistics, and insurance industries are a barrier to such shipments. U.S. Global Security Report says China is working to meet its goal of fielding a military by 2027 designed to deter U.S. intervention in a potential crisis involving Taiwan. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released the annual report on worldwide threats on Wednesday. The report says that as President Xi Jinping begins his 3rd term as China's leader, Beijing will continue to apply pressure on Taiwan to move toward unification. It says China will also take stronger measures to push back against perceived increases in U.S. support to Taiwan. It says Beijing could include more Taiwan Strait centerline crossings or missile overflights of Taiwan. The report also says that to counter the U.S., China will maintain diplomatic, defense, economic, and technology cooperation with Russia. At a Senate hearing on Wednesday, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines noted that China has continued to deepen its relationship with Russia. She said the U.S. government sees China providing assistance to Russia in the context of the conflict. She noted that the degree of the assistance is a very real concern. According to CCTV, at the annual session of the National People's Congress on March 8, Chinese President Xi Jinping told a representative of the People's Liberation Army that China needs to improve the utilization of resources, defense technology, supply chains, and national reserves to develop the military and increase its ability to win wars. Speaking at the session, she said, "Consolidating and improving strategic capabilities is a new requirement that the government has put forward." Dressed in Chinese military blue, he reminded that the military should follow the party's leadership. Besides, he also asked national laboratories to accelerate research on defense technology so that China does not have to depend on foreign countries. He also said that supply chains must be more flexible, calling for a boost in infrastructure construction and the establishment of national reserves for defense purposes. President Biden will travel to San Diego on Monday to highlight the nuclear submarine deal with UK, Australia, alongside British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. The 3 leaders plan to engage in talks about AUKUS, which deals with security in the Asia-Pacific and Australia obtaining the nuclear-powered submarines under the agreement. Biden on Tuesday will then travel to Monterey Park for remarks on gun violence and later travel to Las Vegas. The next day, in Las Vegas, he will discuss his plan to lower the price of prescription drugs. Albanese said earlier on Wednesday that he planned to meet with Biden, saying there would be further announcements about the plans. When the security pact AUKUS was made between the U.S., United Kingdom and Australia in September 2021, it caused a rift between the U.S. and France. France had been seeking its own multi-billion-dollar defense agreement with Australia for submarines. France said it was caught flat-footed by the New Deal, and the country temporarily recalled its ambassador to the U.S. Biden at the time acknowledged that his administration's handling of a submarine deal with Australia was clumsy, and he worked to repair his relationship with French President Emmanuel Macron. The Netherlands government on Wednesday said it plans new restrictions on exports of semiconductor technology to protect national security, joining the U.S. effort to curb chip exports to China. The announcement marked the first concrete move by the Dutch, who oversee essential chip-making technology, toward adopting rules urged by Washington to hobble China's chip-making industry and slow its military advances. The U.S. in October imposed sweeping export restrictions on shipments of American chip-making tools to China, but for the restrictions to be effective it needs other key suppliers in the Netherlands and Japan, who produce key chip-making technology, to agree. The Allied countries have been in talks on the matter for months. Dutch Trade Minister Lee Schrijmacher announced the decision in a letter to Parliament, saying the restrictions will be introduced before the summer. Her letter did not name China, a key Dutch trading partner, nor did it name ASML Holding N.V. ASML. AS, Europe's largest tech firm and a major supplier to semiconductor manufacturers, but both will be affected. It specified one technology that will be impacted is DUV lithography systems, the second most advanced machines that ASML sells to computer chip manufacturers. Because the Netherlands considers it necessary on national security grounds to get this technology into oversight with the greatest of speed, the cabinet will introduce a national control list, the letter said. A White House representative did not immediately respond to a request for comment. ASML said in a response it expects to have to apply for licenses to export the most advanced segment among its DUV machines, but that would not impact its 2023 financial guidance. ASML dominates the market for lithography systems, multi-million-dollar machines that use powerful lasers to create the minute circuitry of computer chips. ASML has never sold its most advanced EUV machines to customers in China, and the bulk of its DUV sales in China go to relatively less advanced chipmakers. Its biggest South Korean customers, Samsung and SK Hynix 000660. KS both have significant manufacturing capacity in China. The U.S. and Europe's top powers on Wednesday expressed alarm at Iran having produced a tiny amount of uranium enriched to 84% purity, very close to weapons grade, and said Iran must explain how it happened. The U.N. nuclear watchdog found uranium particles enriched to up to 84% at Fordow, a site dug into a mountain and the second place where it is continuously enriching uranium to up to 60%. Weapons grade is around 90%. The watchdog recently found Iran had made substantial changes clusters of centrifuges without notifying it beforehand as it should have. With respect to the detected particles of uranium enriched to 84%, all board members should be gravely concerned by this alarming development, a U.S. statement to a quarterly meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency's 35-nation Board of Governors said. Iran must provide full and immediate cooperation with the IAEA to clarify what happened and facilitate all appropriate verification and monitoring measures deemed necessary. The United States on Wednesday imposed sanctions on Iranian officials and companies over accusations of serious human rights abuses, stepping up pressure on Tehran over its crackdown on protests as Washington marks International Women's Day. The U.S. Treasury Department in a statement said it imposed sanctions on two senior Iranian prison officials it accused of being responsible for serious human rights abuses against women and girls. Washington also put sanctions on Iran's top army commander, a senior official in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and an official tied to the Iranian government's efforts to block internet access. Also hit with sanctions were 3 Iranian companies and their leaders who have enabled law enforcement repression, according to the statement. Wednesday's move freezes any U.S. assets of those targeted and generally bars Americans from dealing with them. The step marks the 10th round of such U.S. sanctions since Tehran's crackdown on protests that began after Mahsa Amini, a woman from Iran's Kurdistan region, died in September in the custody of the morality police who enforce strict dress codes. The protests by Iranians from all walks of life mark one of the boldest challenges to the ruling theocracy since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran accuses Western powers of fomenting the unrest, which security forces have met with deadly violence. Pakistani police fired tear gas shells and used batons on supporters of former Prime Minister Imran Khan in clashes which injured several on both sides on Wednesday, March 8, and in which Khan's party said a supporter died. The clashes erupted in the eastern city of Lahore ahead of a planned rally by Khan to kickstart his election campaign, but which the government then banned. Khan later called off the rally in a video message released by his Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI) party. Provincial Information Minister Amir Mir said supporters attacked the police when they were ordered to disperse. Mir said at least 7 police officials were injured, and 12 PTI had been arrested. PTI later claimed a supporter had been killed in the clashes. The party released footage of leaders crying beside the man's body. In a tweet, Khan named the dead man as Ali Bilal, and asked PTI workers across the country to hold funeral prayers on Thursday, March 9. The former premier has been demanding snap polls since he was ousted in a parliament vote of confidence last year. His successor Shahbaz Sharif has rejected the demand and stated elections would be held as scheduled later this year. PTI worker Sardar Bishen Singh told Reuters the public stood shoulder to shoulder with Khan against the government and they would not be deterred by the use of tear gas. Protesters and police clashed in Greece's second city Thessaloniki on Wednesday, March 8, evening, after more than 15,000 people gathered in protest over a train accident that killed 57 people. Masked protesters threw petrol bombs at police who used tear gas to disperse lingering crowds. Storefronts were smashed and the neoclassical architecture of the city's National Bank of Greece branch was splattered with red paint. Thousands of peaceful protesters also continued their march into the night after a day of protests and nationwide strikes staged in outrage over the February 28 train crash and the crumbling state of Greece's rail network. Many of the approximately 350 people aboard the passenger train that collided with a freight train were university students traveling to Thessaloniki from Athens. Police estimated more than 60,000 people, among them transport workers, students and teachers, took part in demonstrations in cities across Greece on Wednesday. Thousands donned in purple marched through the streets of Latin American capitals on Wednesday, March 8, to mark International Women's Day, denouncing violence against women, femicides, gender pay gap and racial discrimination. In Mexico City, women in droves marched along Reforma Avenue to the Zocalo Square on a route that was lined by metal barriers erected to protect buildings and monuments from vandalism. Protester Melissa told Reuters she still feels the pain of a sexual abuse from a classmate she suffered when she was in high school and that was unable to report to authorities. According to authorities, at least 10 women were murdered every day in Mexico in 2022. Carrying signs and indigenous Huifala flags, Bolivian women, including farmers and miners, marched through the streets of La Paz. The march remembered those who shed light on the feminist cause and died for women's rights, protester Florencia Quispe told Reuters. Uruguayan demonstrators in Montevideo carried signs denouncing oppression and hunger and demanded respect. In other Latin American countries, many women also marched on March 8, demanding various rights such as higher wages, an end to racial discrimination, an end to harassment, and improved reform. Justice for women's rights and for justice for victims of gender-based violence. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, CEPAL, as a region, Latin America has an annual average of more than 4,300 femicides per year. Police in the Georgian capital Tbilisi used a water cannon to extinguish the flames from a burning car on Thursday, March 9, as people continued to protest on the streets against a foreign agents law which critics say signals an authoritarian shift. Hundreds of police could be seen holding riot shields and advancing towards protesters in a bid to disperse them. The protest started when lawmakers approved a first reading of the law, which requires any organizations receiving more than 20% of their funding from overseas to register as foreign agents or face substantial fines. The ruling Georgian Dream Party says it is modeled on U.S. legislation dating from the 1930s. Critics, including President Salome Zurabishvili, say it is reminiscent of a law Russia has used to crack down on dissent and could harm Georgia's chances of European Union membership. According to Reuters, although the president of Georgia has vowed to veto the bill, the supreme power in the country belongs to the government headed by the prime minister. President Joe Biden's budget proposal will aim to cut U.S. budget deficits by nearly $3 trillion over 10 years, the White House said on Wednesday, March 8, far more than the $2 trillion Biden had said he would aim for earlier. That's nearly a $6 trillion difference between the president's budget and congressional Republicans' agenda, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, alleging the opposition's plans would add $3 trillion to the debt. Republicans have not yet published a budget, and the $3 trillion figure Jean-Pierre cited is a White House compilation of proposed Republican bills that does not take into account proposals to cut spending. Biden, who intends to unveil his budget plan on Thursday, had floated the $2 trillion deficit reduction figure during his State of the Union address in February. Jean-Pierre did not provide details about how the additional $1 trillion would be funded. This week, I'll show Americans my full budget vision to invest in America, lower costs for families, and grow the economy without raising taxes on anyone making under $400,000, Biden said on Twitter Wednesday. I urge my Republican friends in Congress to do the same. Show the American people what you value. The Democratic president will propose raising taxes on companies and people earning over $400,000 a year in an effort to curb government red ink, while protecting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid from cuts. Ultimately, it will be up to Congress, where Republicans control the House of Representatives, to write related budget legislation. Drone video captured the smoking wreckage of a freight train that derailed near a West Virginia river on Wednesday, March 8. A CSX Corp freight train derailed early on Wednesday after it struck a rockslide in Sandstone, West Virginia, causing injuries to 3 crew members and spilling diesel fuel into a nearby river, the U.S. railroad operator said in a statement. Preliminary information indicated that all 4 of the train's locomotives and 9 empty coal cars derailed, the company said. The lead locomotive had 3 crew members on board. The derailment came a little over a month after a Norfolk Southern freight train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, causing cars carrying toxic vinyl chloride and other hazardous chemicals to spill and catch fire. That derailment prompted the evacuation of thousands of people and raised health concerns to residents of the area, near the state's border with Pennsylvania. It also led to calls for steps to prevent future derailments. Australia will drop the requirement for travelers arriving from China to test for COVID-19 before departure from midnight on March 11, the country's health minister said in a statement on Thursday. The measures also apply to travelers from Hong Kong and Macau. This is a sensible, measured decision based on decreasing COVID-19 case numbers in China, regular data updates from China on case numbers, and the fact that we have strengthened our capacity to detect and respond to emerging variants of concern within Australia of international origin, Health Minister Mark Butler said. Several other countries that implemented similar measures such as the United States, South Korea, and Japan have recently either repealed their arrangements or announced an intention to repeal them, he added. Brazil has decided to resume entry visa requirements for citizens of the U.S., Japan, Australia, and Canada, 2 sources familiar with the matter told Reuters on Wednesday. The country's foreign ministry, known as Itamaraty, is set to announce the decision on Thursday to the governments of the 4 countries. Brazil's government will later publicly announce the measure. The decision suspends a unilateral decision that former President Jair Bolsonaro's government made in June 2019 to facilitate tourism. Brazilians still need visas to travel to the 4 countries. A diplomatic source said the 2019 decision to lift visa requirements had weakened Brazil's ability to negotiate with those countries. Brazilian government studies also showed the impact on tourism numbers was minimal, though the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic may have also limited a potential boost. The number of tourist arrivals from the U.S., who represent a small fraction of tourists in Brazil, in 2022 was still below 2018 figures. Meanwhile, the number of Japanese tourists fell in 2019 by 4.5% and only 17,000 visited Brazil in 2022. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government will allow cherry blossom viewing involving food and drinks at its public parks this season for the first time since the pandemic began. The Metropolitan Government plans to open up its parks from Monday for full-fledged cherry blossom viewings for the first time in 4 years following an improvement in the capital's coronavirus situation. Also from Monday, people across the country will be allowed to choose whether to wear masks. But the Tokyo government says that to prevent congestions, it will keep relevant restrictions in place along Ueno Park's central path, which is lined with cherry blossom trees, during the flower viewing period from Monday through April 16. Officials are calling on people to continue observing antivirus measures such as washing and disinfecting hands and being considerate of others since the pandemic has yet to be over. At the end of the program, inviting you to an exhibition of paintings at the Picasso Museum in Paris, British designer Paul Smith has brought new life to the works of the artist Pablo Picasso. The 76-year-old fashion designer has collaborated with the museum to create an exhibition to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Picasso's death. Famous for his plaid and monkey fashions, Smith has repainted the background with patterns and textures that remind viewers of Picasso's works. All have been modified by Smith with more vibrant and modern colors. Smith's brilliant ceramic plates are set on white industrial plates. Besides, famous works by Picasso such as Portrait of Dora Maar or Bust of a Woman in a Striped Hat are hung on the vertical striped walls in blue and yellow tones. My idea was to show Picasso's work anywhere. The once famous Cubist motifs will be reimagined with new vigor. The exhibition was conceived 4 years ago when Smith was inspired by the collection of nearly 200,000 works at the Picasso Museum. The museum side said they hope the exhibition will attract many people to admire.